Hello, we are back. Hello, welcome back to the Luke Deckard Show. My name is Luke Deckard, and tonight I have mystery writer S.J. Bennett with me. Welcome.
Hi, Luke.
Hello. How's it going?
It's going fine. Thank you. Yes, lovely to
How's,
be here. Thank you for having me.
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It was nice because obviously ages ago I was on your podcast, the Unpublished podcast. I don't remember when that was now. 2020, maybe.
Might even have been, yes,
Yeah.
pre-published.
Yeah, pre-published. I said unpublished. Yeah, pre-published.
For
Long time.
unpublished
Yeah,
people.
because I was still living in Balham. I was still living in Balham at that time. That was many moons ago now. But yeah, it was good fun. So I'm happy to have you on my newish show. It's been going for a couple of months. So yeah, for the people who don't know who you are and what you do, apart from me saying that you are a mystery writer, tell the world about yourself.
Okay. I used to be Sophia Bennett, children's writer, and I still am Sophia Bennett in real life. And I wrote 10 books for children, but I didn't get published till I was 42. So I'd spent many years procrastinating, doing other things. And then my first book, Threads, won the Times Chicken House writing competition. And then the prize was a £10,000 publishing contract. And we sold it to about 18 countries, I think, in the end. And that was great. And as I say, I wrote a whole bunch of books off the back of that. But it was very hard to sustain a career as a children's writer, and I kind of ran out of things to say. And so in 2018, I decided to turn back to my original love. All my unpublished books before had been crime novels. And so I had this idea. I had various ideas. My original idea was about a billionaire cyborg detective. I still think that needs to be done. So it was like Altered Carbon meets Lord Peter Wimsey, I guess. I didn't know about Altered Carbon at the time, but it wasn't really working. And then I had this idea that the Queen could be a detective, and she was fit and well in 2018. And it took me ages to find a way in to write about her, but I interviewed to work directly for her as her assistant private secretary back in the 90s. I was asked to do that. And I came up with this idea of a sidekick who would have that role. And I found an Anglo-Nigerian character that kind of made it feel very contemporary for me. So, so I wrote the first book, The Windsor Knott, and we sold that all around the world. That was really exciting, and that came out in 2020. And then since then, A Three-Dog Problem has come out, which is All the Queen's Men in America, and in the UK, Murder Most Royal came out just over a week ago. And that will come out around the world at some point during next year. And I follow the Queen in 2016, basically. I follow her around from Windsor Castle to Buckingham Palace to Sandringham. And I try and make the books as realistic as I can. But in her downtime, when she's not doing all the things that we know that she did, murders happen in one of her palaces or nearby, and she solves crime. And it turns out she's been doing this since the 1930s, and she's got really good at it. And in my mind, she wasn't actually to start with. She made a lot of mistakes, and I want to write those kind of origin stories, but I haven't done that yet. But by the time she's 90, she's pretty good, and she has this kind of secret society almost of ex-assistant private secretaries, always women who've helped her along the way. And the new one, Rosie, can kind of get sustenance from them, and they kind of help her feel that she can help the Queen solve these crimes. So that's what I do now is write this series. And it's been lovely. I really like being a crime writer. It's a really welcoming, friendly community, generous community. So it's been really lovely.
Yes, I agree. No, I remember reading your first book, The Windsor Knott, when that came out. Well, I take it back. I didn't read it. I had the audiobook, which was narrated by Samantha Bond, who played Moneypenny in the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies. And the reason I went with the audiobook is because I just thought she nailed the Queen's voice so well. I think her voice with your words, like, it just felt so, like, yeah, it felt really organic. It felt like I was literally listening to the Queen narrate this story that was legitimately happened. So I love it. I love this idea of the Queen solving murders, and I love the fact that you're gonna start going back to the past and exploring some of those earlier adventures as well. So for the people who maybe don't know, what was it that inspired you to write about the Queen? Why specifically the Queen?
Well, in 2018, when I was sort of trying to write this cyborg idea, I was driving to a writing retreat and I was thinking about The Crown. I think it was season 1,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just sort of idly thinking. And there was a moment where the Queen picked up a model soldier on a battlefield and put it down in the wrong place. And it was just kind of a funny moment. And I just thought, yeah, it's funny, but she wouldn't do that because she's an
Yeah.
expert on military history and she would have known the battle and
Yeah.
she'd have got it right.
Yes.
And I just thought, God, I know this woman so well. And I know her better than Peter Morgan in that particular case, although I think he did it for effect. And my father, it's through my father who met her several times that I know how good she was at military history.
Mm.
Because he spoke to her when there was sort of regimental change going on. And he said she was one of the few people he spoke to at a very high level who really understood what that meant to the people involved and really kind of took it seriously.
Yes.
And that was wonderful. And so I felt I had this background, and I've been interested in her since I was 11, because I've always been interested in fashion, and that's what I wrote about. Costume, really. That's what I wrote about in a lot of my kids' books. And when I was 11, I was given a book which was one of my favorites called The Queen's Clothes.
Mm.
And it wasn't the queeniness that interested me at all. It was the clothiness. It was about Norman Hartnell and the way that he designed for her in the 50s and 60s. And she was traveling a lot, particularly, and her dresses had to be appropriate for where she was going. So the embroidery had to include the national symbols, and they had to look, she had to sort of show, stand out in a crowd, but not look too flashy. And she had to have weighted hems on her skirt so they didn't fly up in the wind. And it was really complicated being her, I realized, reading all of this stuff. Her clothes couldn't be too easy to replicate. They couldn't appear in the shops the next day because that happened once and it was really embarrassing. And I mean, I think that's what I brought to the crime books, really, is she had this hugely privileged life. She had all these palaces she could go around. She had a bunch of servants to travel around with her. But nevertheless, it was complicated and it was hemmed in, and there were things she could and couldn't do. And she was trying to create a sort of post-Second World War world where she was building the Commonwealth and trying to make people feel welcome. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But she really did have the sense of community. And I thought that was really lovely to have this very senior person who nevertheless remained relatively humble in many ways, her life, which is very grounded. Everybody who met her said, she was just a very grounded person to have a conversation with. And I thought how fantastic to have a woman in power at all, and B, to have one who was a role model for, even after 70 years on the throne, most people had nice things to say about her who'd encountered her and worked with her and that kind of thing. And I thought that was really unusual and special. So, I felt I had a lot to say. Plus, settings. She just had the best settings for detective novels in the world, and there's so many of them. And I'm just going to have to write like a dozen books before I even start to be done with the palaces and the yacht and the trains and the visits to other places and stuff. So, it just felt like a lot of the things I love about crime novels. She already brought those to the part kind of thing, so she made it quite easy for me.
I think it was interesting as you were talking there, you made the comment to kind of say how grounded she was, and that is the impression that I get. I feel like when you see interviews and things like that the Queen always came across as quite genuine, and even though she's larger than life, she didn't seem larger than life. She seemed to understand her role, in life. And I think that's sort of you do really well in your books to sort of tease out the human side of the queen, right? When when the cameras aren't off, and kind of let us see her personality. Yes, Bonnie, I can see you, and I will get to your question in a second. Sorry. Get that in a second, Bonnie. Yes. So yeah, you do really well to bring out the personality of who she is when she's not, having to do the pomp and circumstance kind of stuff, when she's not having to do the Christmas speech and all that kind of stuff. But I think you do that really well with everyone, with Philip and the rest of the family when you bring them in, which is quite cool. Sorry, let's get to Bonnie's question. So Bonnie in the chat says that you once said you interviewed to work for the firm. Do you want to tell about that?
Yeah, so I was invited to go to the palace. I'd given up my job as a strategy consultant in order to become a writer. And I had written a book called The Body of a Dancer, which is still the best title I've come up with. It was about a ballet dancer who dies in suspicious circumstances. And then my detective was a prima ballerina, ex-prima ballerina, and who was she had a sidekick as well, who was an ex-ballet dancer. And he was just straight Archie Goodwin. And we'll get to that.
Yes.
I was just plagiarizing Rex Stout, basically, without even realizing it, I think. So I'd written this book, and P.D. James's editor liked it. So,
Wow.
it wasn't terrible, but it didn't get published.
Oh.
And I had to get another job to earn some money. And so I was trying to be a headhunter, which never happened. But in the course of doing that, one of the headhunters who interviewed me said, "I haven't got a job for you, but, Buckingham Palace, how about working for the Queen?" So I went along, and I actually did, walk across the forecourt of Buckingham Palace.
Oh, wow.
Which just feels really weird. You think, well, surely there's a back entrance that people can go in through. And there is, but no, I was asked to go through the front one. So walking across the forecourt to the door to the right-hand side. And I'd been expecting the people there to be very, I don't know, condescending, maybe, and stuffy. And they weren't. They were charming and very on it, and I'd come from this strategy consultancy background, and they, I had quite high standards, and they really knew what they were talking about. And they were kind of grilling me, I think, on trying to find out whether I'd be good at marshalling a room full of people. If the Queen was on a visit, I'd be probably the person in charge of making sure it went smoothly. And I was in my early 30s, I think, by this stage. And they were trying to decide whether I'd be good at it. And obviously, I didn't get the job in the end. So deciding perhaps I wouldn't be. But I wanted that job so badly. Because, I'd have got all the secrets. I've always been fascinated with politics. And there's quite a lot of politics in my books. But the idea of, hearing all the political secrets firsthand and knowing what's going on. Fantastic. I could never have written the books afterwards because you know that stuff. I assume you have to, you do sign the Official Secrets Act, and you'd have to sort of sign whatever else and never talk about it again. So the books are kind of my imaginings of what that would be like. But I think it would have been amazing.
Do you think that you still could you have written them though? I mean, I'm thinking about people like John le Carre, who were spies, and they wrote spy books, but they weren't. But I guess everything was fictionalized. Whereas,
well, that's the thing. I would have had to, and maybe that's what I would have ended up doing, fictionalizing something like it for a fictional character. And instead, what I've done is create this fictional world for a real character.
Yeah, you've done a really good job. I mean, when I read these books, like it feels so authentic, which is a really tough thing to do. One might think that because you have all this stuff out in the you can see interviews and you can see pictures and you can understand their world. Writing it in a way that feels authentic is and that doesn't feel like it's just an imitation of the stuff we already see, but feels like a lived-in world is very difficult, and you do very well.
Well, thank you. I mean, I like to think that they are more accurate than The Crown. I'm trying to do a different thing from Peter Morgan, but I am told that people who kind of work in the palaces and that kind of thing say the books are more accurate to how it really is than The Crown is. So
yes, The Crown. I think we all agree, and by all I mean you and I, that season 1 and 2 of The Crown are great. And I personally stopped watching after season 3, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'll get round to the other ones sometime maybe, but first two are the ones that I like.
Yes. Bonnie also asks, but you do seem to really know a lot about the royal family. Do you follow the magazines, etc.?
Sometimes. I get really useful information from things like Horse and Hound magazine, on the Queen's racehorses and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Really handy. And Majesty magazine. It's occasional. I know people who've worked in these places, and they usually say, "Please don't quote me," kind of thing. But usually, actually, I mean, with a couple of exceptions, usually I show them what I've done, which I kind of made up a lot of stuff, and they go, "Yeah, that sounds incredibly authentic. Go with that."
Right.
But for example, with the second book, there's a lot about the royal collections in there, and there's a backstory based in the 1980s. And I did manage to have a lovely, lovely conversation with somebody who worked for the royal collection in the 1980s, and he was able to tell me what state it was in and how it was looked after and where the office was, because it had changed in the meantime. And
Yeah.
it was really lovely having that level of detail, and it gave me a lot of confidence with my plot, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. I have various nefarious things going on. And I have to say, he did not say that nefarious things went on, but he allowed me to work out where the kind of the loopholes would be to make things happen.
Nice.
So it's really nice when I can get to talk to people like that. But a lot of it is I just, over the years, I've built up such an interest that I think I have a good nose for when a new fact comes out, whether it sounds right or not. And I know how to sort of check it. And it's kind of 50-50. You hear this stuff all the time, and I'll hear something and go, "No, that just doesn't ring true." And another one, like, "Oh, yeah." And after the Queen died, you were hearing all these amazing stories that hadn't really been told before.
Yes.
And they were chiming very much with what I thought. So that was really nice. And sometimes there were things I'd speculated on, and somebody kind of confirmed it. And actually, I was reading something today. There's a scene in the second book about a portrait of the Queen that was painted by a Northern Irish painter at the time, and the scene is quite a big one, and it's a political one in the book, talking about the Queen in Northern Ireland. And it was really lovely to hear the artist talking in this BBC documentary about, or sort of brief scene about what the experience was really like. And luckily, the two things kind of coincided quite nicely. So I was glad about that.
Yes. And just to echo Bonnie's comment, she at the bottom here, she says that your research really ground the books, especially about the royal collection. And I agree. The research is it helps everything come to life. So tonight, in addition to talking about your books, the Windsor Knott and the Three Dog Problem, which I love that title. If people don't know that is a nice Sherlock Holmes reference to the Three Pipe Problem. When I first saw that title revealed, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so clever. I love that.
I was so glad when my editor let me have that. I suggested it, and I thought, he's never going to let me get away with that, but he really liked it too, so that was great.
Nope, it's too good to not use. Absolutely. But tonight we're also going to discuss your top 6 movies and books, things that movies and books that you watch and read that fulfill you creatively and entertainment wise. Things that maybe you take inspiration from. I don't know, but you've picked 6 very interesting items of entertainment that, for someone discussing the Queen and sort of cozy crime, I think the juxtaposition is quite fun.
Oh, good.
So let's start with a film first. Let's start with one of your films, and I want to talk first about your interest, why you picked for one of your top 3 films 1984's The Terminator.
Okay. When you first talked to me about doing this podcast, the family had recently watched it. We have a 16-year-old, and we are trying to educate him on great movies. And this one, I think it happened to be out on one of the channels, and we kind of said, okay, we are watching this together,
Yep.
kind of whether you like it or not. But he's really up for this. I mean,
Nice.
I've made him watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, so he'll kind of, if you can watch
Okay.
that with me, he can watch anything.
Yes.
It's really long, that film. We haven't realized,
Yes,
blimey.
it is.
Unlike Terminator. So we watched it recently, and it just reminded me how much I love great storytelling.
Yes.
It fascinates me. I was why do I love it? I love it because it has an incredibly strong female character in it. I mean, she's stronger even in, of course, in Terminator 2.
Yeah.
But watching Sarah Connor grow and take her part in this story and ultimately get to be the person who defeats the enemy,
Yes.
I think that's really important, and I like the way that's done.
Yes.
And the backstory could have been incredibly silly, about all these people come from the future and it's all really complicated, but it makes perfect sense to me. I get it. At no stage do I have a problem with it. I love it. I think it's handled incredibly well. And Arnie is so brilliant, and he was famous when he made it. Of course, it propelled him to another level. But I was reading, he has less than 100 words in this film. He has 17 lines,
Wow.
and that's part of its spectacular success, I think, is the character is so iconic. A lot of what we associate with him comes from the second film, actually, not the first one.
Yeah.
But the genuine kind of terror of what he is and what he can do and how implacable he is done without dialogue on the whole. And I read James Cameron saying even his accent was really helpful because it sounded like they hadn't quite got the voice thing right when they made the robot.
Right. Yes.
Which I guess is true. What really fascinated me rewatching it is I read it's originally James Cameron thought of it as a horror movie, and he wrote it as a horror movie, and his agent said that they weren't interested in that, and then he sacked the agent. But it has elements of horror in it. It goes there in a way that a horror movie does. Like, if something is melting, you see it melting. If its eyes are popping out, you see its eyes popping out.
Yes.
And normally I don't go for that, but I just felt it was something about the pacing, as a storyteller that was right at the time, and I wasn't questioning what was going on, and there wasn't some stupid girl who should have known better just standing there panicking and annoying me. And so I was prepared to kind of go with it, even in the gory bits. So yeah, massive fan. I think it is thrilling cinema, and everybody needs to see it.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of I want to pick up on two things. One, the horror comment, and also I want to go back to Linda Hamilton. The horror comment is interesting because, I mean, I feel like horror is kind of so boxed into kind of cheap thrills. But back in the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s, I mean, I would brand the Terminator as horror science fiction, or science fiction horror, because it is a scary story. It is, what is horror? I mean, watching someone's face melt off, seeing this unstoppable machine coming at you, and you can't. That is horrifying. So I would definitely kind of put Terminator into this. Frank in the chat says it's sort of a slasher film, and it definitely falls into that sort of Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger kind of Jason sort of unstoppable force that just is out to kill. So it is very much, I think it is very much a horror film, and I would agree with Cameron. I think he's also right to have sacked his agent for that one. Bonnie mentions in the chat that she goes, I've always admired Linda Hamilton's arms in the Terminator. I remember working out in the gyms. No, she says, I remember working out in the gyms at the time, and it was every woman's dream, but no one could achieve that. I don't remember her arms in the first one, but I remember her being very, very tough looking in Terminator 2. But
she'd been working out in prison, hadn't she?
Yes. On Linda Hamilton, as you were saying, her character is great. And there's a lot of modern dialogue about wanting good representation and stuff like that, but I do feel like there are times where we sort of overlook some of the people who have laid the foundation, and have gone before where we are now, and she is definitely one of them. I think, as you were saying, her role of being this, she's a waitress in a diner who is thrust into a Mary Magdalene like situation, but also is the one who destroys this ultimate killing machine, while also having to bear this weight of being the mother of the of the savior of the human race.
It's like whatever you throw at her, she just takes it up a notch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I've always loved her journey, going from this, like I said, going from this diner waitress to that. Like when she's at the end of the novel, or not the novel, which is at the end of the movie, and she's in the Jeep, and she's starting to do her recordings for John, all that kind of stuff. It's just like that is such a badass character change. That her character arc is great in that movie.
Heading into sort of Thelma and Louise territory at that point, isn't
Yes.
it? Kind of, badass woman in a car in the desert doing her thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting because being a sort of teen, early 20s in the 80s, I felt that women had a hell of a long way to go to reach parity at the time. And I've been talking recently about being told I needed more gravitas working in the late 80s. And by gravitas, the person advising me, who had my best interest at heart, meant, be taller, have a lower voice, have bigger shoulders, be more male, basically more weight than you do, and then you'll get on. I was very aware, I might...
There's something going on with your microphone. It's gone all digitally. Maybe fiddle with the cord or something.
Okay.
Oh no. We will sort this.
Better?
No, it's crazy interference at the moment. Maybe unplug it and plug it back in.
Good old.
In the meantime, I will mention Frank's comment in the chat. Frank says that he met Linda Hamilton, and she was nice to him. Met her at a fan expo, and also made her lose a bet. He says that I brought my King Kong Lives for her to sign, and she thought no one would do it. Way to go, Frank.
Has that fixed anything?
That has fixed it.
Okay.
We're good.
Tell me if that happens again. Strange.
Yes, yeah. Carry on. I hate to interrupt you.
Well, yes, just talking about the 80s. So I didn't feel that I had parity. I did feel very much that in any room that I was in, I was likely to be the one asked to make the coffee because I was usually the only one in a skirt and high heels.
Yes.
But looking back, I still think I had it better than young women now. Because we could have kind of any haircut that we like. We had crazy clothes. We didn't have Instagram. We weren't supposed to look like sex dolls. And we did have a lot of really great women in movies and pop, actually, who people like Susie Sue and that kind of thing, who could be our role models. And I don't see that so much now.
No, I mean, this is a slight tangent, but like some of my favorite characters growing up in the 90s were some of the characters off of the various Star Trek shows, in particular Deep Space Nine. I think Deep Space Nine had some of the most badass like female characters on television in the 90s, particularly Kira and Jadzia Dax. They were awesome, tough, but human, though they were aliens.
Yeah.
Beings, they were great. And I agree. I think it's tricky nowadays, I think, for sure. There's not I'm not sure we have as much freedom as we think we have, or as much, don't know, representation as we think we have, or as authentic of representation as we think we might be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be hyper successful, often women still need to be incredibly sexualized. But the interesting, I guess the real difference is that if they are successful, they do tend to own their careers much more now, and they can monetize it much more than they could before, and they tend to own the company, which they should be doing. Whereas there was such a massive glass ceiling in Hollywood and in the music industry. And Linda Hamilton herself, I'm not sure what happened to her, but why wasn't she helming films in the 90s? She should have been. I mean, if she was, they weren't movies I was getting to see, and I would have watched them if they were really big, I think.
Yes, I guess that's always a tricky thing because I don't know, and I could look up her IMDb, but I guess there is also that thing where I suppose there's some people once they've had a couple of hits, maybe sometimes they like to take a step back and do other things. It's like you know, when we don't see many actors from like Friends or something like that, or whatever, people who've been who've got their moment. But Frank says Dante's Peak. I've not seen that. I'm so sorry. I don't know. And I haven't seen King Kong Lives either. So she was in movies. She was in
movies. Okay,
she
good.
was definitely in movies. Bonnie says glass ceiling. She was, I'll say I was a studio exec in the 70s. Definitely a token woman among men. Yes, that would be. We should have you back on, Bonnie, and discuss that at some point. That would be quite the conversation. Hollywood in the 70s.
I'd love to hear about that.
I'm sorry, Frank. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen it. Interesting facts about Terminator. The science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, who wrote a bunch of Star Trek, original Star Trek back in the day, said he was blown away by Terminator. But he believed the screenplay was based on a short story and episode of The Outer Limits that he had written. He and Orion settled in 1986 and gave Ellison an undisclosed amount of money. So he basically sued the film for plagiarism because it was apparently too similar to one of his things. I suppose that happens. I suppose it's tricky because this stuff is it's not wildly original in that.
Well, as you say, it's kind of sci-fi slasher movie. So yeah. It's all about how you do it, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, I've never seen his episode of The Outer Limits that he wrote, which is titled Soldier. Maybe it is a little bit too close for comfort. I don't know. But sometimes you're like, well, maybe it must have been more than just the premise. But I'm sure when they were writing the film, they weren't sitting there thinking necessarily about his film. Carry on.
Well, that's just reminding me about this morning. I discovered the Daniel Craig Belvedere Taika Waititi music video, which I love, but it is so similar to Christopher Walken doing Weapon of Choice.
Yes,
and that's kind of fine. I mean, there are a couple of moments in it that are just pure homage, but I'm not hearing them talking about that in the interviews, and that it just makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, really.
Yes. I watched that. I watched that commercial, and again, yes, my thought was, no, this is the Christopher Walken thing. We've seen this, and also, and also, it was like, but just like you, I was like, yeah, no, like I've seen people mention it on Twitter, but I've not seen them talk about it, and I'm like, wait a minute. You're not talking about this blatant this is clearly an homage to this, and you're just, but yeah, I don't know.
I'd have really loved to see Christopher Walken in the background or something.
Yeah.
That would have been really nice.
Yeah, but I do think this is a topic for another day. But I do feel like that commercial, while funny, says something about Taika Waititi and his maybe limited originality at the moment. I haven't been wowed by his stuff in a while, though. What We Do in the Shadows is great. I love that.
Yeah.
Show that movie.
One great thing to come out of it was Rita Ora's song, I think, which is actually my favorite thing about it.
Yes.
So go her for doing that.
Yes. Bonnie says Harlan, he was a good friend, which I think is so awesome. He had a reputation for battling fiercely. Yes, I have some of his quotes actually tacked my my monitor here because I find him great. James is, or Lunsford as we know him, is in the chat. He goes, I agree that every woman element of Sarah was inspiring in a way that Ripley in Alien, for example, was not. Although Sigourney Weaver also had the arms. Yes, Sigourney. I mean, I like Ripley, and we had an interesting discussion a couple weeks ago with another author who we were discussing Alien 3, which anyone can go back and listen to that episode. But yeah, I think Sarah Connors has maybe a better, more thought out character arc, but I also think that Ripley is still quite an important action hero in the pantheon of all this stuff.
Yeah, well, me too. I mean, Aliens, again, it's another kind of, it's a horror movie that not normally my genre, but I love it, and I love it largely for her.
No, she's great. She's wonderful. Bonnie says, yeah, Ripley was a scientist stroke astronaut, a heroine in the writing, not in everyone. Yeah, no, I agree. There were things at the end where like she's basically naked at the end, and like she doesn't need to be basically naked at the end. That felt overindulgent, to say the least. So Terminator, I love that. I love that Terminator is part of your top 6. If you were to pick, 3 films and 3 books, Terminator would be one of your films, at least at this moment in time. If you're anything like me, Sophia,
changes from day to day.
yes. There's probably like one film, maybe 2, that would kind of maybe always be there. One of those being the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and maybe X-Men 2. Those are always there, but the rest are always in flux. All right, let's talk about one of your books. Let's talk about one of your favorite books. So you chose, and again, these are very interesting choices, I think. One of your books you chose was Murder by the Book, which is a book by Rex Stout, who wrote the Nero Wolfe detective stories. And this book came out in October 12th, 1951. What is it about Rex Stout stuff that appeals to you, that makes you say, this guy is, if I had 3 books to pick, he's one of the authors, and here's his book that I'm picking?
His writing has been so influential to me. Lots to talk about, but it's the style of Archie Goodwin's narration that is the key, because that's what that's what I plagiarized when I started out. The confident, swaggering, sexy sidekick, with Manhattan at his feet. He's not rich, so you can identify with him, but he has access to what wealth can bring through his employer. So lives in this gorgeous brownstone, has food cooked for him by this incredible chef, Fritz. But nevertheless, he still gets a check every week from his boss, Nero Wolfe. So I love Archie, and I love Archie's adventures. And I love this idea of a detective who's sort of by choice housebound, Nero himself up with his orchids, who hates detecting, who'd much rather be doing almost anything else, and he does it because he needs the money to feed the whole orchid addiction. But is brilliant at it. And then I mean Rex Stout wrote so many books. I was reading over 30 Nero Wolfe novels and 39 novellas, and he was doing a bunch of other stuff as well. It just seemed to pour out of him. And I love the characters, and just the confidence of the storytelling. There's this conundrum, and Nero Wolfe has an idea about it, and Archie goes off, and then somebody else dies, and there's usually a dame in distress that needs to be rescued, but there's usually more to her than you at first think. And it gave me a sense of 50s New York, which must have been a
Yes.
very exciting place to be. I mean, he started in the 30s, didn't he, and went on until the 70s. But I think of
Yeah.
the books as kind of 30s or 50s.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was wondering to myself, why not 40s? Why 30s or 50s? And then I realized, of course, he'd stopped writing during the war so that he could really contribute to the war effort by countering Nazi propaganda in a
Yeah.
very thoughtful, methodical way. He's such a hero. I
Yeah.
really hadn't realized.
Yes.
So yeah, without knowing the man, I
Mm.
loved his version of storytelling, and to me, it was just what detective stories were.
Yes.
And funnily enough, even they have a feel of hard boiled in a way in terms of the
Mm.
Danes and the pounding the pavements and things, but we would still call them cozy now, I
Yes.
think.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I hate the term cozy, but I
I
know
do
what
too.
people mean. But they're not all about the goriness of the crime or the
Yeah.
hateful psychology of the evil perpetrator. They're
Yeah.
about the puzzle and and how the guy solves it. So and that's what I always enjoyed when I was growing up, and that's what I've tried to replicate, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, big fan. And I was really pleased that when I first went to Manhattan, there were brownstones and it did look like what I'd imagined. I was very satisfied by that.
Yes, yeah. No, I am I'm not a massive fan of Rex Stout, but that's not to say that I don't like him. It's just that I haven't read all of his stuff. But what I have read, I do like. Very, very much so. He is a very good writer. Um, it is interesting though that his this detective guy that he's written is this brilliant guy is this obese eccentric guy who's he's basically an armchair detective, which is really fun, and quite interesting because there are you can see interesting similarities between what Rex Stout is doing, in his books that sort of imitate and tweak and mess with Sherlock Holmes. Um,
Yeah.
Nero Wolfe is essentially a sort of Mycroft. Mycroft being fat and lazy. Are we allowed to say fat? Anyway, he's fat and he's lazy. He's fat and he doesn't want to do the legwork. Mycroft is famous for that. And so it's interesting that Nero Wolfe is sort of in that frame of mind, where he's like the American version of sort of Mycroft Holmes.
Do you know, I've just realized, actually, I always thought of him as a bit of an Ironside because I watched a lot of American TV in Hong Kong when I was kind
Yeah.
of 7, 8, 9. And that's when I discovered the Muppet Show and that kind of thing. And I think that's when I watched Ironside. So I saw TV that a lot of British people didn't see. And I loved Ironside. And maybe I just made that kind of subconscious connection between somebody who sits in a chair a lot and
Yeah.
uses his brain.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder.
What's also cool is in 1956, a man by the name of John D. Clark theorized in an article of the Baker Street Journal that Nero Wolfe was the offspring of an affair between Sherlock Holmes and Irene Adler. I've heard this many times before, and I know that Bonnie, you're in the chat. You're not going to agree with this. It is one of those like fun theories, and I'm weirdly okay with this sort of fan theory, even though I'm also like, nah, that would never happen. But
I think of them both as pipe cleaners. I'm with Bonnie on this. I can't see
yes,
it.
no, it's hard to imagine, but at the same time, it's like, oh, I sort of like this idea, but yeah, no, it is definitely not. Bonnie, where did it go? Yeah, Bonnie says it's interesting that you hate the term cozy. What do you think defines a cozy?
People are talking about it so much now because it's become the sexy genre. It's so interesting because when I had my idea
Yeah.
in 2018, it really was not. It was the unsexiest one you could possibly write in. And then Richard Osman came along and the pandemic came along and people wanted comfort.
Yes.
And it took off like a rocket.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing. So it is crime that is more about the puzzle than the dark side. I would
Yeah.
say. So all murder mysteries contain murder, and if they're any good, murder is a terrible, terrible thing, and its terribleness will be in there somewhere. But it
Yeah.
doesn't. Cozies tend not to linger on that. They do. It is there, and Agatha Christie is now put in the cozy category. And if you look again, if you look at some of her murders, if you look at the murders in The Body in the Library, for example,
Oh,
one of
yes.
them is horrific, but
Yes.
you don't linger on it.
Yeah.
And it's more about the people who are left behind, I think, and the cleverness of the detective in solving it, and the reader feeling equally clever at kind of, just hopefully being one
Yeah.
paragraph ahead.
Yes.
And so a lot of it, but I mean, this can be true of non-cozy, but a lot of it is about setting as well. And often the setting is a place that the reader would like to be. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it as well. And I mean, and it can range the gamut of. There's one book that I blurbed recently, which is about a sort of a talking cat. Well, it wasn't quite talking, but its owner could understand it on a barge in Maid of Ale in
Yeah.
London. And you go from that, as I say, to kind of Body in the Library with its hideous car crash. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. But ultimately, I think the readers who like that kind of stuff read to escape the stresses of daily life rather than kind of launch into them in a deeper way.
Yes.
And I like both. There are times in my life when I want to do that, and there are times, there's times I want to watch Terminator and times when I want to watch a rom-com.
Exactly.
So there we go.
Exactly. I tell you what's fascinating to me is we talked about this on your a little bit, I think, on your podcast a couple of years ago. The PhD that I'm working on is in crime fiction, predominantly looking at hard-boiled fiction, and in the course of doing that, I sort of have to explain where did hard-boiled fiction come from. And for those who don't know, we're talking like the Raymond Chandler, the Philip Marlowe's, Big Sleep, Maltese Falcon, that kind of stuff. And what's really interesting is when you look at the Golden Age stuff, it is very much a puzzle mystery. The effects of the crime and the murder are sort of secondary, and it's all about the game. The game is to solve the puzzle of this intricate murder mystery. And the people are sort of, in some ways, not totally, but in some ways they're secondary. And there were a lot of rules, so many rules in the kind of 20s and 30s about what crime fiction should be. And it was essentially a form of escape. I think Dorothy Sayers is quite famous for saying that it's a literature. It's not literature. It's just kind of basically pure escapism, to which Raymond Chandler told her to go do one for for saying that. But what's fascinating to me is that when we look at when the golden age is what it's called back in Agatha Christie's time, what the golden age was, in terms of its sort of escapism, and it's sort of choosing to not necessarily dive in deeply to social problems of the day. Not that they're not there or subtly there,
They really are there, a lot of them. Yeah.
but they tend to be kind of background noise in a sense, in favor of the grand puzzle and the restoration and the taming chaos at the end. So it's fascinating to me that was happening at a time where you're talking kind of post World War One, post World War Two, where there's a lot of bad stuff, and people don't really want to maybe necessarily deal with more bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting to me that at least here in the UK, there is a resurgence the past 3 to 4 or 5-ish years of what we now call cozy crime, which is basically the rebrand of what Golden Age mysteries sort of were, in light of political nonsense or pandemic stuff.
Yeah. I
It
think 2016 and the pandemic had so much to do with it. I completely agree with
Yeah.
you. Without those, I don't think it would have had its resurgence
Yeah,
either.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I guess
for me, the hardboiled fiction, which I love too,
mm,
there's a huge cynicism to it, which I'm completely fine with. But
yes.
it's about the world is a terrible place, and I'm going to tell you how terrible it is, and then there's going to be a twist that shows you that it's even more terrible than that, and
Mm.
there's going to be another twist which shows you it's even worse than that, and there's going to be a final twist that shows you it's just irredeemably awful. And here is this person picking their way through it, and sometimes they have a minor victory, and that's a bit of a relief, and sometimes they don't, and we can all just be devastated together. Whereas with what they call it's just the word cozier I don't like.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
more, there's a fundamental goodness to the world, and there's a fundamental shape to it, and we're
Yeah.
going to cling by our fingernails to that and describe
Yes.
that. I mean, I think we all think the ship is going down. It's just, are we going to describe hitting the icy water, or are we going to describe what it was like on deck before it kind of
Exactly.
it went down?
I think like to use like maybe like a superhero analogy. There are days where you want to read the Superman comics. There are days when you want to watch Superman movies, but there are also days you want to watch a Batman movie. They're very different. They are in the same universe,
Totally that.
but it's
Totally.
they look at the world differently, and sometimes it's nice to just have a little bit of hope. Because sometimes it's a bit hopeless.
And I think that's why I haven't watched the Superman and Batman films even.
Oh,
It's like
dude,
those worlds, in my world, those worlds should just not encounter each other.
yeah,
Yeah, bad things will happen.
I think it was last week. Was it last week? I've lost track of time. I don't know what day it is, what time it is. I mean, I do, but I think it was last week. I had Nadine Matheson on, and we did a big DC discussion, and eventually it descended into us discussing that Batman Superman movie and why it was so not good. She liked it more than I did. Disclaimer: she loves that stuff. But as you were saying, it was marrying those two philosophies, the hopefulness and the dark grittiness of Batman and the hopefulness of Superman. It wasn't very well done, and everything just came across as dour and sad and depressing. And if you got Superman, you want things to be happy. If you have Proro, you want a good fun mystery. If you got a whiskey soaked detective, then you want something that's got a bit gritty, and I think it's absolutely fine. I'm never about kind of pitting these things against each other. I think they're both great, and they both serve a very good function. And so Rex Stout is a great shout for.
One thing I discovered in sort of researching him a little bit more for you is that he was good mates with P.G. Wodehouse, which I did not know. I should have known, because apparently P.G. Wodehouse mentioned Rex Stout quite a few times in his books, and I have read every word P.G. Wodehouse wrote, pretty much, I think.
Yes.
And I didn't particularly notice that. But yeah, they were mates, and Rex Stout modelled himself a little bit, apparently, his style on P.G. Wodehouse's characters, and I completely get that. There's a real Jeeves and Worcesterness to Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. Of course there is, and P.G. Wodehouse is just my kind of uber novelist. I only kind of didn't bring him to this because surely it's been done before. So I was really fascinated that was there, and maybe that's another reason. Maybe Rex Stout is kind of Ironside meets P.G. Wodehouse. And that's why I love them so much. But I mean, it gave me the confidence to have a queen detective who couldn't really leave her palaces to go and wander around with a magnifying glass.
Exactly, which is great. Okay, so let's move on to some of your other picks. Let's go back to the films. One of your top 3 films was Paddington 2. Was it Paddington or Paddington? It was Paddington 2, wasn't it? Yes, Paddington 2. And I recently rewatched it because I needed to refresh. I didn't need to, but I wanted to go back to it because I've only seen it the one time. Though I've seen Paddington 1 several times. Paddington 2, what is it about Paddington 2 that someone's like, hey, you got 3 films to pick. You've already picked Terminator. Now you're picking Paddington 2.
Like many people, I think Paddington 2 is one of the best films ever made. I'm really not alone in that. I think it had a perfect score on Rotten Tomatoes for a very long time. Paddington 1 is completely brilliant, but I think Paddington 2 is even better. The reason I picked it, partly Hugh Grant's incredible performance in this. The way he just embraces the baddiness of it is just wonderful.
It is.
From beginning to end. Partly the Hugh Grant, Ben Whishaw thing going on, Ben Whishaw voicing Paddington, and I just seen them in the because my political thing, the wonderful TV thing they did about Jeremy Thorpe. I can't think what it was called now, where they had such different characters. But mainly I picked it because it keeps its theme of the UK being a welcoming place for diversity and for immigrants, and it just I mean, going back to what we're saying just now about Superman versus Batman, it has a Superman quality to it of, wouldn't it be wonderful if this is the world that we recognize as ours, where immigrants are welcome to this country and they enhance it, and we're grateful. And I think that's a really important, really important message.
But there's always a Mr. Curry on the street.
Well, I think that's Mr. Curry is there to point out that he's alone in his feelings this time. Just to sort of highlight what it could be like, but isn't. I think he's a very important character, and I think Peter Capaldi is really brave to play him.
So good, God.
So good.
I love this film. When you picked this one, I was really excited because I love Paddington 2. I love Paddington 1. These are a great double hitter. Paddington 1 and 2 are great films. I love this idea of, like, on paper it sounds like it's gonna be stupid. Paddington goes to jail. Like, what? You're gonna put Paddington in jail? But dear God, what they do with that idea is so fun. It's so charming. And when he goes to question the cook, I can't remember the cook's name now off the top of my head.
No, I can't either. Is that Knuckles? I think Knuckles is the cook, isn't he?
Knuckles, that was it, because he does the Knuckles thing with his hands. When he goes to tell Knuckles that the food isn't very good, and he's about to beat the crap out of him, and then he's like, "No, I don't want that," and he throws the marmalade sandwich in his mouth, and there's just like come to Jesus moment with that. I just love that, and then I love that he's like, "The bear is under my protection now." I was like, oh my. There's just and then like the whole prison, like when the prison canteen becomes like a fine dining restaurant with like nice, oh my God, the whole thing is great.
All in their pink prison outfits, which is
no, I love Paddington too.
Also, I identify very strongly with Mrs. Brown, Sally Hawkins.
She's great.
I love how slightly ditzy she is, but her heart is in the right place, and I try my heart to be in the right place as well. And I love the artisticness of her house, and I just want to be her. I think she's completely wonderful, and I love. There's a real steely grit to her, which comes through a lot in Paddington 2. She has a much bigger part to play. There's a bit in it that I simply can't watch, an underwater bit. I have to go out of the room when that.
It's tough. Yes. That was tough to watch the first time around, because I've only seen it twice. The second time it wasn't as bad, but I remember that first bit being like, "Oh my God, you're gonna die! This is too much," because they're submerged underwater and she's trying to get him out. But Mary Brown, she's played by Sally Hawkins, who I love. I think she is a terrific actor. She was someone way back in when Peter Capaldi was announced to be leaving Doctor Who. It was kind of obvious that they were going to pick a lady to be the next Doctor. And I, on my old blog that no longer exists, I actually put her down as someone who I think would be perfect to play.
She's done it really well. Yeah, there's an otherness to her, otherworldliness that would work. I really wanted Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but I guess that was never going to happen.
No, no. She's probably too. I mean, Sally's too big for this, but they're both too big for that. Too big for that role.
Yeah.
But they both could have worked. What do you think in terms of Paddington 2? I often call this film a masterclass in nailing kind of the setup and the payoff. And I don't know if you know what I mean by that without me explaining, but
In what would you see as the payoff of this one?
well, they set up everything so perfectly at the beginning with both her son's love of trains,
Oh, yes,
her
yes, yes,
swimming,
yes.
and all of this stuff has this wonderful
Her daughter's
payoff.
love of the printing press and
Yes,
yeah,
yes. That everything that is introduced in that first 5 minutes of that movie
so
has
true.
an
And it all just
important
seems
role.
like it's character establishment, doesn't it? You
Yes,
think that's all you're getting,
yes,
and then every single detail is important. Yes.
yes, yes. When the son's like, "I'm no longer J-Dog, I'm Jonathan Brown." Like, oh my god. I love trains
Yeah,
and it's fine.
you're right.
Oh, I love it. Paddington 2 is a charming film. I
And I
don't know. Go on, go on.
I was just gonna say, and in the middle, the book as well, I'd forgotten, but I mean, just the idea of a pop-up book,
Mm,
and the treasure hunt, it just lots and lots of my favorite things, one after the other in there. Um, yeah, that sort of add to its specialness for me as well.
yes.
And of course, there's a Queen connection now. I think she was very clever to associate herself with all of that.
Yes, that was what was that for again? Was it for a Jubilee? It was Jubilee,
Mm.
wasn't it? Yes, that scene. Yes, I remember people being really. Even my mom said this when I Skyped with her once. Not Skyped, whatever we do now that isn't Skype, but I just keep saying Skype because I'm an old fogey now. Um, she was like, I was like, that was such a fun thing, and like Paddington wasn't even there, and I was like, I remember seeing articles about that as well. Like, it's a CGI bear. Of course he's not there.
Yeah, I think people were very very complimentary about the Queen's acting capability. I'm not sure how difficult that was, but
I don't think it was
nevertheless, it
difficult
was
at all.
charming.
It was, she's already look, 10 years ago, she already had a scene with 007. Acting with an imaginary bear is a piece of cake for the Queen. So yeah, let's Paddington 2. Great film. I love that pick. Let's go back to books. Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers is one of your top picks for books. It's interesting to me that all three of your books. I don't know if you did it for the show or it's legit everything for that lands for you. But you have picked three interesting golden age style, not style, but three golden age type murder mysteries. What is it about that particular type of book that you're like, if I'm stuck with three books, this is the genre I want to stick with?
I mean, yeah, there was a point where I thought, oh yes, I sort of ended up with these three that are quite similar in that way, and I could show off the breadth of my reading interest. But actually, I do read a whole bunch of different things. I mean, I could easily have picked Hail Mary by Andy Weir or The Martian, which he also wrote, which
Oh, The Martian,
both
yeah,
books I
yeah,
think
yeah,
are
yeah.
absolutely magnificent. But with Golden Age, it's what I was reading when I was kind of 11, 12, 13, I think. And
Mm,
there's some of those things just stick with you.
they do.
There is a sort of PG Woodhouseness to them. I like the puzzleness. I like the world. And I fell in love with Lord Peter Wimsey when I was about, 13, 14, who stars in Whose Body. And so there's that. So it's a tradition that I really like writing in, definitely.
Yes. I mean, I
Going
totally
back
agree. I
20
mean,
years.
I think if I were to be asked the same question, I'm pretty sure at least two out of my three would be crime books. They would be hard boiled books for sure. One would be Raymond Chandler. One would be Arthur Robert B. Parker for sure.
Uh-huh.
So I totally with you on that.
I
Oh,
thought I'd
nice.
show you that. It was on my bookshelves. And
That is, yes, the first book in the Spencer series. Terrific. If anyone listening has not read Robert B. Parker's mystery books, go read them. And also, I don't, Sophia, I don't know, have you ever seen in the 80s? They did a TV series in the States called Spencer for Hire, starring Robert Urich and Avery Brooks as Spencer and Hawk. It's terrific. If you can ever they did a DVD release a few years ago, and the only way you can really find it is secondhand copies on eBay. I'm
Ooh.
telling you, it is worth getting. It is, as we were kind of saying earlier, kind of bringing this back to what we were saying about Terminator and Linda Hamilton and its kind of progressiveness. We've just recently finished watching all 3 seasons. It is far more in touch with social issues and hard-hitting messages, and gripping storytelling than half the stuff on television and in films today.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't hold any punches, and it's like, you know what? Here's a really intense storyline about, say, like abortion. We're going for it, and we're going to give you all of the views on it, and you as the viewer have to decide what you think. Where do you sit? And I mean, there's times we watch it where me and Claire were watching, we're kind of laughing because we're like, this is so intense for like your Sunday night TV viewing. But that show in for it. So I highly recommend that. But anyway, back to
Cool.
Whose
Sounds
Body.
good.
I don't want, I could get distracted on Robert B. Parker for ages. But yeah, Whose Body? This is an interesting book. I have read this book. I've actually read all the ones that you've brought in tonight.
That's
That's
that
a
one.
cool edition. I like the
Yeah, I like my edition the best. Yeah.
Yes, mine is not as fun
And
as that.
unbelievably, it is actually relevant. Unlike most book covers that we have to put up with, it is from a scene in the book. This dead body wearing these
Heaven
spectacles.
forbid.
Whoever did the jacket design.
What is it about Dorothy Sayers that you love? I mean, I get it that you're loving the puzzle mystery stuff. But what is about Dorothy Sayers' writing and her storytelling that you connect with?
I think she writes well. She was at Oxford. I studied Italian literature for my PhD, modern Italian literature, and she was sort of big into Dante, and she translated him very well. And she knew her stuff academically, and I think the quality of her sentences is high.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it is that actually, and it's interesting because I'm reading a lot of books for the 3rd or 4th time now, and some of them I like less as I come back to them. I find sometimes the story is a lot thinner than I'd remembered it being, or the solution. There's one where the solution is to do with the blood type of the victim, and it's like, I don't think I believe you.
Right.
But Whose Body was the first one she did with Lord Peter Wimsey, and I just found it gripping. And whenever I'm sort of wondering what to do with my own stories, I do find myself going back to it. This body is found in a flat in Battersea, in a very unusual way. And Lord Peter Wimsey is already a detective. That's another thing I learned actually from this, and a bit from Rex Stout as well, is don't start with your origin story. Start with somebody who knows what they're doing, because in this genre, that's what the reader wants. Somebody who's kind of already underway. And so Lord Peter is fascinated. He hears about it sort of from his mother, because it's his mother's builder's friend kind of thing who's found this body. And it just doesn't make sense for this body to be where it is. And I love the ultimate solution to it, which again is one of those things where you only discover at the very end what really happened, and what really happened was disgusting. It wasn't cozy in any stretch of the imagination. But by then, that's not what's important. By then, what's important is how Lord Peter comes to it, and Lord Peter Wimsey would drive me crazy. He's a British aristocrat in the 1930s, before all the crashes. He comes from a very wealthy family. He's a trust fund kid. He lives in Piccadilly. He's an incredibly natty dresser. He clearly, goes out with chorus girls and things. And he's very witty, and he's very well educated, and he's a good cricketer. And he would just be but he has PTSD from the trenches. He has shell shock, really, which just comes up every now and again. And for me, that is essential to me liking him. He's got this vulnerability, which shows that under the old Etonian poetry quoting fop, there is an incredibly sensitive soul who somehow survived Eton and somehow survived the trenches, was slightly broken, more than slightly broken by what he saw. And his butler now was his manservant during all of that. And and when he's about to condemn somebody to death, which effectively is what you do when you're a golden age detective, because they will be hanged, he can't bear it and he has nightmares. And so yes, I kind of haven't done that to my detective. I think her vulnerability is more that people underestimate her, and she has to live with a sort of slightly crotchety man who she loves, who loves her, but who just drives her crazy. But she doesn't have the same level of vulnerability. But in Lord Peterworth, I love it, and you first kind of see that in this book, I think. And I remember enjoying the story, and then getting to the scene where he's kind of having nightmares and going, oh, okay, now it's gone to a slightly different level, and it's more important and it's more grounded, and I like it more.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite interesting to me. There's a quote from Dorothy Sayers somewhere that I read during my research, where she basically says that, being a poor writer, she's like, Lord Peter Wimsey gives her the opportunity to, deck out a lavish Piccadilly, a mansion flat kind of situation, and live vicariously through this imaginary world, which I quite love. There's in some ways I can relate to that, though I do tend to gravitate more towards the kind of the poor, PI kind of stuff. But I also love that. Like, yeah, no, I like that. I can see why, especially at that time, because Whose Body came out in 1923, right out, not long after the First World War. Like, I can see why you'd want to do that. You want glitz and glam and the a bit of the sprinkling of the jazz age. It's just sort of coming about there. The other thing that's interesting I find about Dorothy Sayers is I never really found, you can contradict this and that's fine. I never really believed in Peter Wimsey's PTSD in the early stuff, particularly in Whose Body. I never really felt that he was a guy that truly suffered PTSD. And I don't know if that's just because I was forced to put that into my PhD book. And therefore had to do a bunch more research on it. But it's interesting to me, though, because we've spent so much time talking about the tough American genre and the puzzle game version of the British version, the British type of crime mystery, that closer to the end of writing Peter Wimsey, particularly that book that you mentioned where there's someone who has to get hung, and I cannot remember the name of that book.
It happens a lot, because usually when he solves the murder, that's the next thing that's going to happen.
I think it's the one where he gets married.
Oh, well, there's Strong Poison where his the woman that he's trying to rescue is going to be hanged if he doesn't rescue her.
I think that might be the one, and
so she's in the condemned cell effectively.
Yes, I think it is that one where that is. It's interesting because that comes kind of later in writing. I think this is more in the 40s into the 50s, and it's interesting that at that time you start seeing a bit more. At that time, the hard-boiled stuff in the States is taking off all over the place, and it's become maybe a little bit more acceptable to explore more bluntly some of the grittier traumas. And I think, and it's interesting that she starts doing that later in the day. I think there'd be an interesting study there. There's an interesting essay to be written about how these two genres kind of influence each other along the way.
Yeah, there really is. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because, as we know, detective writers, crime writers read each other's fiction and appreciate each other's fiction. So there's always going to be a lot of kind of interrelationship. It's not like, you know, somebody who writes in a cozy genre is going to read a hard-boiled one and go, oh, that's horrible. No, it's crime fiction. It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about not Batman, Superman, but I would have loved Lord Peter to have shown up in a Dashiell Hammett or something like that, and to see what he'd have done in that world, because I think he'd have gone a lot harder, a lot quicker, and that would have been a really interesting thing to observe.
Thinking about that, I think they're downstairs. I suppose Hammett did sort of do that a little bit with his Thin Man stories. Not his Continental Op or his Sam Spade Maltese Falcon, but the Thin Man storyline books that he did, which I'm not super familiar with. Those are more witty and fun and a bit more lighthearted and comedic. That would be interesting to look at from that perspective, to kind of compare that to Dorothy Sayers and that sort of at times a bit more lightheartedness, PG Woodhouse, comedic kind of stuff. But let's move on. We're gonna go back to films now. One of the other film, the last film that you picked, is the Bourne Identity. I do love that two of your films are just violent, intense action films. Terminator and the Bourne Identity, with a nice bit of Paddington there on the side, which like is a great little mystery, but lighthearted and fun. The Bourne Identity, I love this film. What is it about the Bourne Identity that you're like, this is the last film I'm going to pick?
I live with men on the whole. You know, daughter of an army officer. Watch a lot of spy movies, adventure movies, gun movies of one sort or another. You know, I cannot get the men to watch rom-coms, so I watch these, and if the storytelling's good, I enjoy them. So I think that's kind of how I end up watching them to start with. And I mean, as we know, the Bourne movies just reset spy moviedom and forced Bond to completely up its game.
Oh, they did. Rightly. Oh, yes.
It was really important that they happened when they did. I'm a massive, so many things. Well, one thing is authenticity, which I think goes through all of my film choices. I have to believe in every element of the story as I'm going along to really, really enjoy something. Terminator does that for me. As I say, it can be outlandish, but it you know, as long as it carries me with it, I'm fine with that. I remember watching Starship Troopers, another movie that I really, really like, with my husband at the time and our friend, who were both into boy things. And we were coming out of it afterwards, having really enjoyed it, but they were getting into a real discussion about the type of weaponry that was being used. And they just really felt that it was very, I think, very unrealistic, that they were using kind of old Russian weapons. And I was thinking, they're fascists fighting spiders on a foreign planet, and you're fine with that. But the type of weaponry. But anyway, back to Bourne. So I think Paddington 2, I prefer it to Paddington 1, because I think it's comedy and sometimes, you know, you have to broaden it. And I didn't always believe it in Paddington 1, but I did in Paddington 2. I just felt that they managed to keep the authenticity of the character better in the second version. And I think with Bourne, I believe Jason Bourne and what he does and why he does it and who he does it with.
Yes.
More than any of the James Bond films, particularly when he has sex with somebody. I just think she would be up for it in those circumstances. I completely get those two getting together. I'm really glad they did. It's not exploitative. Whereas usually in any of the Bond movies, at that point, I'm thinking, oh, crying out loud. So that's one of my favorite things about it, actually. I think it's the haircutting scene. You know, they're both trying to change their appearance. They're both absolutely terrified and exhausted, and they are clinging on to each other, and it's a moment of vulnerability for both of them, and I just absolutely believe those two people are going to get together, and it was lovely. So I like that, and I like Matt Damon. I know he's more problematic now.
Oh, he's fine. He's
whatever.
We don't need to talk. He's fine.
We won't talk about that.
But favors the brave.
Yeah. But I adored Good Will Hunting, and I love people who can write well, and I thought that was written well. And loved him since then. And so to see him doing this
Mm,
part, I thought he brought a sexy vulnerability to it that
yes.
was new, that
Yes.
I really liked. And and then it comes back to, I think the plotting is great. I think
Yes.
the idea of us finding out about Treadwell is
Trista.
fascinating.
Trista.
The pacing is brilliant.
Yes.
Just I love everything.
Yeah. No, I agree. I loved the Bond films growing up, because you mentioned Bond a minute ago. I
Mm,
loved the Bond films growing up, but they were always I was always hit and miss with them. There were elements of certain Bond movies that I really liked, but my whole life changed when it came to the spy genre when the Bourne Identity came out. Obviously at the time I had read the books and just went in straight with the film, and
same.
gosh, it's great. I mean, I like to watch the Bourne trilogy. I like to watch it once a year. Actually, Bonnie says that her and Alan just watched the Bourne Identity this week.
Oh, I'm
Um,
so
yeah,
glad.
I I might try and get it in during the Christmas holidays.
Yeah, we might as
Um,
well actually get our
yeah.
fix. We know them so well, but it doesn't matter.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, it's one of those films that every time you go back to it, it's similar to the book. You go back and it it's still fresh. What they do, uh, the characters are so fleshed out. There's so
Mm,
much authenticity going on with them, and I agree.
mm.
The relationship between Bourne and her name is Marie,
Maria,
his
yeah.
love interest is wonderful throughout that film. I mean, she is like, this is effing insane. What are we doing? Why am I doing this? I need to get out of this car. And he's like, no, I agree. He's like, if you just want to take the money and go. This is insane. I totally agree. And then the next scene, he's using a pen as a weapon, and it's just so tight and practical and intense. And you feel for Bourne's struggle. You feel for this
Yeah.
this he's desperate to find out who he is. And every time I watch it, I'm just like, God, we're even people who know them, who know who they are probably more lost than you are. Like, this is such a relatable kind of concept where you're like, who am I? And I love, there's this great bit of full circle ness or dumb in the Bourne movies, and it begins with the ending scene in the Bourne Identity where they're at the farmhouse, and there's the Treadstone agent who's out there trying to kill
Mm,
them all, and he's sends the family away, and he's trying to do it anyway. He shoots the guy, and he's dying in the field, and the guy just looks up at Bourne. He's like, look at what they make us
things they
give,
make you do.
you
Yeah.
know, and it's just like, God, yeah, like, this is just senseless killing. This is just senseless murder. And this new version of Jason, this person who has emerged out of the water, fresh and new, is like, no, this isn't right. Whatever I was in the past, I hate that. What we're doing is wrong. Um, and there's this, it comes full circle in the Bourne Ultimatum when he's standing on the rooftop and he's got the other Treadstone agent there, and he says those same words to that other Treadstone agent before he jumps off the building and into the East River. And you're
Yeah.
just like, oh God, like, you feel it. You feel the tension, you feel the emotion from in this series. And it's one of the most clever, the first three films are one of some of the three most clever spy films out there. I
They are, and the more you know, I mean, as you're saying, it's so fleshed out, but the more watching it for the second or third time, and you know who all the characters are, and you know
Yeah.
what they really think and what they're really doing, makes it more fun, actually, just to watch them kind of
Yes.
plotting and misleading you in the background.
Yes.
Um, very, very cleverly done.
Yes. And they're one of the few films that, in terms of adaptation, is wildly different to the books. Well,
Right.
books 2 and 3 are wildly different to films 2 and 3. Book 1, Bourne Identity, is relatively ish similar. There's a few big changes, but they're one of the few where I'm like, what, the adaptation, the book is great,
Yep.
the films are great, and they're different, and I'm like, I don't even care, because they
Oh
both
yeah.
are
No,
so great.
that's a very, very valid thing.
Lovely. Bonnie says the Spy Games with Redford and Pitt is one of the best spy movies ever.
Oh, really? Okay.
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen
No,
that.
I don't think I have either. I like both of them. I did think 3 Days of the Condor was one of my favorites until I saw it again recently, and I have so many issues with it now that I can't watch it again.
Fair enough.
Such a shame. But I tell you what, another film I love is The Long Kiss Goodnight with Gina Davis.
Oh yeah.
Similar premise. I mean, I do think one of the fun things about the Bourne movies is what you were saying, you kind of get it both ways, in that Matt Damon hates who he's become, as we now know, been forced to become, and what he does. But on the other hand, he's really good at it.
Yes.
And that's fun.
Yes. Oh yes. Yes. I love the scene when he's sleeping on the bench and he just starts talking to the guys and he's like, how can I know how to talk to them? And then he starts like moving really fast. He's like, I know how to do this. I don't know why. I love it. I love it. It's just it's this weird mix of like kind of fantasy where you're like, oh, I wish I was Jason Bourne, but at the same time it would be hell to be Jason Bourne.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Speaking of other kind of spy movies that I think are quite fun, that I think hold up and are interesting, is we recently rewatched oh no, what's the film? What's the Air Force One with Harrison Ford?
Yeah.
It holds up. It's great. And the opening, if you go back and watch it, is very topical considering what's going on the world stage right now.
Oh God.
In,
Okay.
with wars and things like that. And yes, we were watching it because we were watching it and Claire, her job is she's a lawyer. She trade compliance, all that kind of stuff. So when there are certain things that are that the president is saying, Harrison Ford is saying, and you're like, this is very topical and interesting, and I won't say any more, but
Okay,
everyone
might
go
go back
back
to that
and
one.
watch it.
Good December movie. Is that a Jack Ryan one? I can't remember.
No, it's not.
No.
It's not. But also go back and rewatch the Jack Ryan movies because they're great. Right, we are on to the final book. We've done your 3 films. We're on to your final book. You have chosen Josephine Tey's The Daughter of Time. Very interesting book. An interesting book in that the detective, what's his face? Alan Grant, which makes me think of Jurassic Park. Alan Grant is laid up the whole book because he's broken a leg. Is it 1 leg or 2 legs? I think is it 1?
It's just 1. It's not that bad.
Yeah. He's broken his leg. He's
a bit.
stuck in the hospital, and he gets obsessed with trying to work out the truth of whether Richard III is like a nasty guy or not. Tell us, what is it about this that you're like, that's a good book. I'll make that my 3rd choice.
Well, the reason that I went for this one and not, let's say, an Andy Weir space one or something like that, was because when I read it, as I got further towards the end, my mind was blown, and I thought, wow, this is incredible, both what it's telling me and how I now feel about history. And I got really, really excited. And I was thinking, why don't more people know about this book? It's amazing. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But just when I was reading about Rex Stout and the fact that he knew P.G. Wodehouse so well, it was just another of those moments of, oh wow, there was this connection that I had absolutely no idea about. Yes. And that reminded me of the Josephine Tey thing. So I'll come back to what it's about in a minute. But what happened to me was, so I read it. I thought it was incredible. Really, I read it, I mean, a few years ago, quite recently, and it's a slim novel, really. And I thought, again, so why don't more people know this amazing book with its sort of revelatory ending? And I was busy writing a blog post about how incredible it was to introduce people to it. And
Mhm.
then in the course of my research, I discovered that it is regularly voted one of the best detective stories of all time. People love it. I had no idea. And a lot of what it's about is, this detective discovers this amazing thing, his great discovery, and then he discovers, oh, everybody already knows this. And so I just felt, history was repeating itself a lot. So yeah, I am not the first person to really enjoy The Daughter of Time. So it's about a guy who sees a picture. He's bored out of his skull, and he sees a picture of Richard III, and he's a detective, and he does something that I don't believe for a minute, which is he looks at this picture and he uses his detective skills to analyze it and decide that this is of a nice person.
Yeah.
And that sends him on his quest. We all know that particularly from Shakespeare, that Richard III was this evil hunchback who
Yeah.
did terrible, terrible things, and yet the picture is of a nice man. How can that be? And I just think you cannot tell what somebody's like from their picture, you silly man. And I don't think that you being a detective for many years justifies this. Nevertheless, suspend disbelief at that point and carry on. And so what he does is use the resources at his disposal, which are not many, to find out more. And he starts with children's history books, which kind of reinforce what he thought. And then the history that he gains access to becomes more and more sophisticated until he just completely discovers a whole new way of looking at Tudor history. And I've always loved Tudor history. And I was taught what he thought. And reading the book made me completely rethink the whole of Tudor history. And I loved having my mind blown to that extent. And I loved rethinking the way history is told. And I think I was reading lots of Hilary Mantel at the time. So, really, really good Tudor history fiction kind of thing. And I just think it's really cleverly done. It suckers you in that it's a very, very light, silly book. And then it just, to me, gets more and more engrossing as you go on. I think she does it very cleverly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I read this book early on in my PhD studies. It was recommended to me by my supervisor. It proved completely useless for what I was doing, but I did enjoy reading it because I found it was. Because obviously not obviously, but my book is historical fiction. And what was fascinating to me about this book was the way in which this book is both contemporary but historical at the same time. It uses crime fiction, it uses problem solving, puzzle mystery in a very unique way that you really don't see very often in either tough guy genre, police procedural, whatever. You really don't see crime done in the way that this book does it. And that is to use, the powers of observation and deduction, etc., to reconstruct a historical figure through the material that's out there, and sort of repaint, as you were saying, repaint our understanding of who this guy is, which is it's fascinating. It is a very fascinating, interesting use of the genre, but also a sort of a weird study of Richard III through fiction that is bizarre but also fascinating at the same time. In the chat, someone by the name of Deb says, I was given the book when while I was in the hospital recovering from a major surgery in the 80s. As I was studying history at the time and was in hospital, it was the perfect gift to pass the time. I mean, it sounds like it. It's right up. It's it's the perfect book for someone recovering, I suppose. But yeah, no, it is often picked one of the in the top 100 crime novels of all time, and I get why, because its uniqueness is quite, I think, endearing. I suppose. But this is a very good choice. I like this choice of book. Do you read other Josephine Tay books, or is this kind of your?
This is actually my favorite one.
I
I
can't
got the
read the
right one.
title.
Yes,
Sorry,
it's very, very small writing. It says Brat Farah.
Brad Farr.
Um,
Yes.
I actually didn't read her when I was discovering Dorothy Sayers and Naomi Marsh and Agatha Christie and I was reading sort of P.D. James and people as well. And Josephine Tay should have been part of that group, and she wasn't. And I'm not sure why. It must be
Yeah.
because my mother didn't like her work, I imagine, and it's mostly my mother's bookshelves that I was stealing
Right.
books from. And I read one recently. I can't think what it's called. It's very famous, but the classism in it absolutely put me off completely, because the
Right.
way that you could tell who was a goodie and a baddie was how well behaved they were in a very classist way. And I just thought, what are you talking about?
Yes.
But this one, Brat Farah, was recommended to me by Ruth Ware, who is really Ruth Warburton, who is another children's writer who became in her case, very, very successful crime writer. And she said this is one of her favorite books. And I thought, well, if Ruth likes it, I will. And I absolutely loved it. I think I was researching horses for one of my Queen books. And she said, well, it's got a lot of horses in, which it has. And was genuinely useful because the horses are treated like people. And that I did find that really helpful. But Brat Farah is one of those, what's the French one with Gérard Depardieu, where the guy Martin Guerre, the return of Martin Guerre. So somebody comes to a place and claims to be the long lost son, and in this case, and Ruth has written a version of this as well, but in this case, the guy knows he's not the long lost son, and the reader knows the guy knows he's not, and yet the family accept him, and he feels quite bad about that. And then in the course of fitting in with this family, and it's a very 1950s English pastoral scene. They have horses, they go to balls and things.
Yes.
But it's a small family. And they're lovely people. I think you want to befriend them as he does. And then he discovers what seems to be a very minor mystery. And then that builds and builds, and then by the end, it's a big murder mystery. And he's at threat.
Yes.
And yeah, this one I think is a great one. I really enjoy it, and I love the ending.
I haven't read it, so I can't unfortunately speak to that particular book. I did read the Singing. I read the Singing Sands a long time ago, but that's a Tay book. But it's one that hasn't. It's interesting. It was kind of Scotlandy. Yeah, it had some interesting bits in it that were actually kind of useful because my book is set in Scotland, and there were some travel bits that were not too dissimilar in terms of time frame from my book to her book. That was quite useful to read.
I think she can do setting very well. She's good at the British Isles and that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, that was reminding me of something that's keeps coming and going, hovering at the end of my brain. If it comes back, I'll say.
That's fine. So yeah, these are your top 6 picks. I think they're great. And I hope that, if someone hasn't read or watched one of these 6 things, they can go back and they can go and do it for the first time, or go back and rewatch them in a new light. Sophia, it was super fun to have you on. I loved having you on. I'll have to bring you back.
This is such a great format, Luke. I really love it. Yeah, no, it's fun. I'm sure I can think of another 6 if you want me back at some stage.
Yes. Well, I have other ideas. I want to do a couple of periodic episodes on adaptations. So maybe bring you back for some Jason Bourne talking again. But comparing the book and the film could be quite fun.
I just thought of my Josephine Tay thing before we go, just in case anyone's interested. Is Nicola Upson has now written Josephine Tay as a detective, which I haven't read yet, but I really want to. Oh, yeah. So here is somebody else doing the whole real person fictional detective thing. And I think it's an interesting twist on it.
Yes, no, that is fun. I'm trying to. There are others that are like in the back of my. Now that you've said that, I'm like, oh, there's others, but I can't quite think of them. I think there's some with like Doyle and Houdini out there and stuff like that as well. It is quite fun. I'll have to look into the one with who wrote the Josephine Tay one up.
Nicola Upson, I think her name is.
Yes.
And I think it was Giles Brandreth did Oscar Wilde as a detective.
That rings a bell. That rings a bell. That could be fun. So yeah, just so you know, thanks everyone for watching. If you can, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already done that. In the meantime, where can people find you, Sophia, on the interweb so they can follow you? What's your
If you go on to Twitter or Instagram, I think I have one of those link tree things that links to everything. But
Nice.
the easiest place to start is sjbennettbooks.com. And you can find me there, and then it kind of spreads out from there.
Good. And also there will be links to your books in the description so that people can go and buy all of your wonderful books about the Queen and solving all sorts of fun mysteries. So yeah, anyway, this was great fun. I look forward to having you back on in the near future, hopefully. And I'll be back next week. Next week, I have Nick Obregon coming back to discuss another retro review. We're going to talk about Prometheus and Alien Covenant, following up from our Alien 3 discussion. We're going right to the end there. So yeah, I will see folks back next week. Have a good one. I'm gonna say goodbye now.
Goodbye.